The thing that's important to remember is that we have been told and we have been taught that in order to stay thin and to stay healthy, we need to eat a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet. This is the biggest lie perpetrated upon the American public. You look at the food pyramid that they're teaching the children. They're teaching the children that they should be eating about 11 servings of carbohydrates a day. Do the kids know what that means? I mean, to them that means what? A piece of bread, a donut. You know, it's lunacy. The bottom line is we are, as human beings, 3/4 of our structure is made from protein, and the other quarter is made from fat. We need to eat what we're made out of. So that food pyramid should be turned upside down. We should be eating predominantly protein and a lot of fat and a little bit of carbohydrates. To be a true healthy vegetarian, I think, is A, very difficult. B, there are certain nutrients that you can't get if you're a true vegetarian. And B12, for example, there are no plant sources of B12. The two groups of people that I've seen over the years that tend to have the most health challenges are vegetarians. And because most people don't understand what that means. A lot of vegetarians, you know, they think potato chips is okay, you know, right? So they don't really know what they're doing. And the other ones are the health food junkies, you know, the ones who run to the health food store and get every time they read an article, they go buy something from the store and they take too much of things that they're not supposed to be taking. But so when we're talking about food, again, I really want to make it a really strong point of realizing that you have to pay attention to what you're eating, not just in whole foods, but to avoid the things that they're shoving into everything else. The other part of that is you have to be able to digest your food properly. If you can't digest your food properly, you're not going to absorb your nutrients. And that's based on a simple principle of pH. Most of us have an idea of what pH is. pH is just acid or alkaline. We know that some things are acidic and some things are alkaline. As human beings, we're supposed to be slightly alkaline. The pH of your bloodstream is largely determined by the pH of your gut. So if you have an extremely acidic stomach, and when you think of pH, it goes from 1 to 14, 14 being very, very alkaline, 1 being very, very acidic. Water should be 7, which is neutral. Our bloodstream should be slightly alkaline, about 7.4. Your stomach should have a pH of about 1, which is really, really acidic. And again, if you took that acid out of your stomach and put it on your hand, you'd burn a hole in your hand. But your stomach is made, I mean, God had a plan, however you want to put it, your stomach is made to be able to hold that very, very strong acid. It has a very, very thick mucousy lining. Your stomach makes something called mucin, which protects it from the acid. When you have that strong acid in your stomach and it mixes with your food, a couple things happen. A, the protein that you eat gets broken down from protein to amino acids. We can't absorb protein. We can only absorb amino acids. Amino acids are the little teeny pieces that get strung together by our DNA to make a protein. And we cannot use a whole protein in our body. If we absorbed whole proteins, which some people do because they have a problem with their gut, you end up with things like autoimmune disorders. So you need the strong acid, A, to break down your protein. B, you need the strong acid because it sanitizes your food. Every time we eat, right now in this room, there's a gazillion bacteria everywhere. There's no such thing as a sterile environment unless you're living in a bubble. So every time you eat something, you're being exposed to bacteria. That strong acid in your stomach sanitizes your food so you don't get sick. So that's really important too. The other thing that happens with the strong acid is, when you're looking at chemistry, and for any of you that had chemistry, you remember these experiments. We did experiments with a strong acid versus a weak acid. And the reactions are just like they sound, strong or weak. So if you have a strong acid in your stomach and it goes into the small intestine, you have a strong response. The intestine is made to be alkaline. The pH of your intestine should be about 8.5. That's a million-fold change in pH. That's pretty vast. So what happens is the strong acid goes into your small intestine, and the small intestine has a response, and the response is kind of like if you put that acid on your hand, because the cells in your gut are similar to the cells on your skin. They're all epithelial cells. The main difference between your hand or your skin and your intestinal cells is the ones in the intestine are taller. but the response is the same, the sensation is the same. So when that strong acid goes into your small intestine says, holy cow, we're burning up. And you have a hormonal response. And the hormone that's produced is called secretin, and there's another one called cholecystokinin. But secretin is produced, and it tells the pancreas, you need to come and put out the fire. And so the pancreas sends over bicarbs to neutralize those acids, and then once they're neutralized, the enzymes that also come from the pancreas are then activated, so now you can digest your food. They say you should drink alkaline water, and there's a lot of people selling Kangen water and all these different things. In theory, that's a great idea. But the bottom line is, everything that you eat first becomes acidic, whether it started out acidic or alkaline or not, if you have a healthy digestive system. And then once it gets into the small intestine, as long as you have a healthy response, everything becomes alkaline. And then when you absorb the food, it gets absorbed in an alkaline state. The difference between like these artificially produced alkaline waters and a true alkaline water like you'd get from a mineral spring is that the artificially produced alkaline waters, it's not a true alkaline water. They put a charge into the water that changed the configuration of the water so it will temporarily test as alkaline, which might be okay. But the bottom line is, if you take that water and you let it sit for a couple days, it's not alkaline anymore. It reverts back. And I know people have spent thousands and thousands of dollars on these waters. But a true alkaline water, the reason that that's good for you is because when it's alkaline because it has minerals in it. And minerals is what creates the alkalinity of water or creates the alkalinity of food. So that's the part that's important. Is if you want to alkalize your body, you want to get a lot of minerals into your diet. So how do you do that? A lot of greens. There's green vegetables. You got kale and romaine and broccoli and all these things that are loaded with minerals. That's how they get their color. But again, if you let's step back. So let's say most Americans have a little bit of stress in their life, just a little bit. And every time you go into the fight or flight response, one of the very first things that happens is you turn off digestion. Digestion comes to a standstill. And it makes sense if you look at it from a biological standpoint. If you're in fight or flight, it's because something has happened and your body has to fuel you. It has to produce cortisol to give you sugar because you need to save yourself from something. Most of us aren't having to run from a bear. We're just stressed because of something else. But when that happens, the non-essential systems of your body when you're in fight or flight get turned off, which means digestion gets turned off, reproduction gets turned off. All the systems that you don't need to either fight or run are turned off. And people tend to live in this chronic state of stress. And so what happens is because digestion gets turned off, after a period of time, your ability to produce these strong acids in your stomach becomes diminished. So they've done studies that show that the average American doing an endoscopy, sticking a tube down your throat and taking a test of the pH of your stomach, the average American has a pH in their stomach of about 4. Now it's a weak acid. We talked about a strong acid versus a weak acid. A weak acid that mixes with your food and then goes into the small intestine does not have a strong response. So now you have this weak acid in the small intestine. The small intestine doesn't scream to the pancreas, please send me bicarbs to put out the fire. It starts to become acidic. When your small intestine becomes acidic, your ability to digest your food slows down and becomes impaired. You're going to digest some, it never completely stops, but it's going to slow down. So one of the most common symptoms of that is that people start getting heartburn. And the reason they're getting their heartburn is because instead of the food being processed and being moved through the intestine like it's supposed to, it's sitting there and the intestine is waiting for you to do what you need to do to break it down. And so everything starts to back up, especially proteins, because remember we need a strong acid to digest proteins. When proteins sit and rot in your gut, then the acids start to back up. People get heartburn, and it also increases your risk of having things like cancer in the colon. What do people do when they get heartburn? They run to the store and they take a medication to stop the acid, right? Either neutralize the acid or stop it altogether, and now they have drugs that do both in one pill. Do you think that fixes the problem? It makes it worse. So every time people, and they have done long-term studies now that show that people who are on acid-stopping medications, within a decade they start having severe bone loss, and they're walking around having spontaneous fractures for no reason. So our digestion can't be underplayed. That's the most important part of any sort of diet is to make sure that you're absorbing your food properly. If you cannot absorb your food properly, your body thinks it's starving. And if you're in starvation mode, you can't lose weight. It doesn't matter how much you eat or don't eat, your body thinks it's starving. So that's number one. So it's really important to make sure that your digestion is working like it's supposed to.